r/NoSleep. If the clock strikes 3:33 a.m., shut your eyes and don't move until they're gone. The first time it happened, I thought I was dreaming. The second time, I wished I had been dreaming. The third time, I realized it was far worse than any nightmare. I live alone in a small 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. Quiet, peaceful, and isolated, exactly the way I liked it. Or at least, I used to. 3 nights ago, I woke to the sound of my bedside clock resetting itself. A loud, sharp beep pierced the silence, yanking me out of a deep sleep. I blinked groggily, my room bathed in the pale glow of the moon filtering through the blinds. My eyes darted to the digital clock. 3:33 a.m. I sighed, assuming it was just a power surge. But as I reached for my phone to check the time, I noticed something odd. The house was too still. Not the comforting stillness of a quiet night, but an oppressive, unnatural silence that made my skin crawl. Then, I heard it. A faint creak, like someone shifting their weight on the wooden floorboards in the hallway. My heart raced as I strained to listen. Creak. Creak. The sound grew louder, closer. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The creaking stopped abruptly. I held my breath, my ears straining in the silence. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging along the walls. I swung my legs out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat I kept by my nightstand. Steeling myself, I crept to the bedroom door and cracked it open. The hallway was bathed in shadows, but I could make out faint outlines of the picture frames hanging on the walls. Nothing seemed out of place. "Hello?" I called out again, this time quieter. That's when I saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, silhouetted against the faint moonlight from the living room window. It was tall, too tall, and unnaturally thin. Its head cocked to one side, as though studying me. I froze, my grip on the bat tightening. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, though my voice was barely a whisper. The figure didn't move. Then, in a fluid, jerky motion, it raised an impossibly long arm and pointed at me. My blood ran cold. Before I could react, the figure dissolved into the shadows, vanishing into the darkness. My breath came in short gasps as I scrambled back into my room, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night, clutching the bat until sunrise. The next day, I convinced myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by stress or exhaustion. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the clock beeped again. My eyes flew open, and dread washed over me. The silence was back, oppressive and smothering. I didn't dare move. Then came the creaks. Slow, deliberate, and much closer this time. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it was my imagination. The creaking stopped just outside my door. And then I heard it. "Hello," guttural whisper, like many voices speaking at once, just inches from the door. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was menacing, hungry. The doorknob rattled. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. Tears streamed down my face as I willed myself to stay silent. After what felt like hours, the whispers stopped, replaced by the faint sound of nails scraping against the walls again. Morning couldn't come fast enough. By the third night, I was a wreck. I had tried everything, prayers, salt at the doors, even sleeping with the lights on, but nothing helped. As the clock struck 3:33 a.m., the same sequence began, the beep, the silence, the creaks. But this time, it was worse. The whispers came again, louder, clearer. And then, my bedroom door creaked open. I couldn't help myself. I opened my eyes, just a sliver. What I saw will haunt me forever. The figure from the hallway was standing at the foot of my bed. Its face, or what I assumed was its face, was a pale, featureless void. Black, hollow sockets stared at me, and its mouth twisted into a jagged grin that stretched unnaturally wide. It tilted its head, as if it knew I was awake. Then it lunged. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in broad daylight, drenched in sweat. My door was still closed, and everything seemed normal. But I knew better. Now, every night at 3:33 a.m., I wake to that same beep, that same silence. I've learned not to move, not to open my eyes. Whatever it is, it only seems to react if it knows I'm awake. I don't know how much longer I can take this. Every night, it gets closer, lingers longer. If you ever find yourself awake at 3:33 a.m., whatever you do, don't open your eyes. And for God's sake, don't let it know you're awake. But last night, something changed. I thought I had gotten better at handling it. 3 nights in, I had a plan: keep my eyes shut, stay absolutely still, and let it pass. But as the clock beeped and the silence fell over the house, I felt an unmistakable weight settle on my chest. Not the kind from anxiety or fear, this was physical. Heavy. Crushing. The whispers began again, louder this time. They weren't at the door anymore. They were in the room. I felt my heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. My instincts screamed to open my eyes, to see what was happening, but I clamped them shut, forcing myself to stay still. The whispers grew closer, circling the bed. They weren't just voices anymore. I could feel the breath of something cold and damp against my ear, hear the faint clicking of nails or claws against the wooden floor. And then came the voice, clear, low, and venomous. "We know you're awake." The air left my lungs. My body tensed involuntarily, and I knew I had made a mistake. I tried to fake sleep, keeping my breathing slow and even, but it was too late. The weight on my chest shifted, and I felt something press against my arm. Fingers, long, bony, and impossibly cold. They trailed along my skin, stopping just above my wrist. A sharp, dragging sensation followed, like the edge of a blade grazing my flesh. I clenched my teeth, holding back a whimper. The voice came again, but this time it wasn't alone. Multiple voices spoke in unison, overlapping like a chorus from hell. "Look at us." I couldn't take it anymore. My eyes snapped open. They were everywhere. Figures, tall and twisted, crowded the room. Their bodies stretched and contorted unnaturally, as if they were barely held together. The one closest to me, perched on my chest, had hollow black eyes and a mouth that stretched far too wide, filled with jagged, needle-like teeth. Its face was inches from mine, its breath icy and rancid. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure tilted its head, its grin widening as if it was savoring my terror. "You shouldn't have looked," it hissed. Before I could react, the room erupted into chaos. The creatures began to move, their limbs jerking and twisting in ways that defied logic. They tore at the walls, leaving deep gouges, and their whispers turned to high-pitched screeches. I threw the covers off and bolted for the door, but they were faster. One of them grabbed my ankle, its clawed hand slicing into my skin as it dragged me back toward the bed. I kicked wildly, my foot connecting with something solid. The creature let out an inhuman shriek, and its grip loosened just enough for me to scramble to my feet. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, my bare feet pounding against the cold, wet grass. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound my ragged breathing. I turned to look back at the house. Every window was dark except one, my bedroom. In the faint glow of the moonlight, I could see them. The figures were pressed against the glass, their hollow eyes locked onto me. One of them raised a hand and tapped on the window. Once. Twice. Then it pointed directly at me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys as panic surged through me. When I finally got the door open and climbed inside, I locked the doors and started the engine, peeling out of the driveway without looking back. I drove for hours, unsure of where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get as far away from that house as possible. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I pulled into an empty parking lot and let my head fall against the steering wheel, exhausted and trembling. For the first time in days, I thought I was safe. But then I noticed it, the clock on the dashboard. 3:33 a.m. It didn't make sense. The sun was rising, and I had driven for hours. It couldn't still be 3:33. The car radio crackled to life. "Hello," static-filled hum. Then came the whispers. "You can't run." My heart sank as I looked up. The rearview mirror reflected the back seat, and in it, I saw them. Crammed together, their twisted faces staring at me, their grins wider than ever. "You let us in." I don't know how I escaped. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body battered and bruised. The nurses told me a passing driver had found me unconscious in my car, parked on the side of the road. They said I must have had an accident, but I knew the truth. It's been a week since that night. I haven't gone back to the house. I haven't even left the hospital. But the whispers have started again. At first, they were faint, only in my dreams. Now I hear them even when I'm awake. And last night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., I woke to find a figure standing at the foot of my hospital bed, its hollow eyes staring down at me. I don't think I can escape them this time. If the clock ever strikes 3:33 a.m., wherever you are, whatever you're doing, shut your eyes. Don't move. And for the love of God, don't let them in. It's been 3 days since I saw that figure at the foot of my hospital bed, and I can feel the noose tightening around me. I've tried everything, prayers, salt lines, charms from the hospital chaplain, but none of it has stopped them. I know they're coming for me. It's only a matter of time. Let me explain everything that's happened since. The morning after I saw the figure, I tried telling the nurse what I'd seen. Predictably, she brushed it off as a bad dream. Hospitals can be unsettling at night, she said with a patronizing smile. Especially if you're dealing with trauma. But this wasn't trauma. It wasn't a hallucination. I know what I saw. Still, I didn't press the issue. Instead, I started making plans to leave the hospital. I figured that if I kept moving, maybe I could outrun them. I asked for discharge papers that afternoon, but when the nurse came to my room, she had bad news. The hospital was understaffed, and my release would have to wait until the next day. That night, the whispers came back. It started just after midnight. I was sitting in bed, staring at the clock, when I felt the air grow heavy. The ambient hum of the hospital, a distant murmur of voices, the beep of heart monitors, suddenly faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. I froze, my eyes darting toward the door. And then I heard it. Click. 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 The sound of claws against the tile floor. Slowly, deliberately, they were making their way down the hall. I pressed myself back against the bed, my breath caught in my throat. The sound grew louder, closer. I couldn't see anything in the dim glow of the hallway light, but I felt them. The same cold, malevolent presence from my house. The whispers began, faint at first, then rising in a crescendo. They were in my head, crawling under my skin, invading every corner of my mind. "You can't hide," they hissed. "You can't run." The door handle rattled. I didn't think. I grabbed the remote for the hospital bed and lowered myself as flat as I could, pulling the blanket up to my chin. I shut my eyes tight and willed myself not to move, not to breathe too loudly, not to make a sound. The door creaked open. The room was plunged into freezing cold as the air grew still. I felt the pressure shift around me, the undeniable sensation of something entering the room. Heavy footsteps followed, slow and deliberate. They circled the bed, their whispers filling the air like a swarm of insects. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to fight back, but I knew better. If I moved, it was over. Then, I felt it. A hand. Cold, skeletal fingers wrapped around my ankle, their grip like ice. Slowly, they began to pull, dragging me toward the edge of the bed. My body stiffened, but I didn't dare resist. My breathing was shallow, ragged, but I kept my eyes shut, praying they'd believe I was still asleep. They stopped. "You're lying," one of them hissed, the voice impossibly close to my ear. My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought they'd figured it out, that they'd drag me away to whatever nightmare realm they came from. But after an agonizing pause, the hand released my ankle. The whispers receded. The footsteps grew faint, fading into the hallway. And then the door clicked shut. The next morning, I begged the doctor to let me leave. He raised an eyebrow at my desperation, but he signed the discharge papers. By noon, I was out of the hospital, packed into my car, and heading out of town. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to get away. As the miles rolled by, the dread in my chest began to lift. Maybe I'd finally outrun them. But I should have known better. That night, I checked into a motel off the highway. It was one of those cheap, run-down places with flickering neon signs and peeling wallpaper. I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to sleep. By 10 p.m., I was curled up on a lumpy mattress, exhaustion finally overtaking me. But my peace didn't last long. At 3:33 a.m., I woke to the sound of the room's alarm clock beeping. My stomach dropped. I didn't even need to look at the time. I knew. The whispers started immediately, louder this time, more insistent. I squeezed my eyes shut and curled into a ball, praying they'd go away. But they didn't. The bed dipped under the weight of something sitting on the edge. Cold fingers brushed against my shoulder, and the whispers grew deafening. "Why do you run?" they demanded. "Why do you hide?" I wanted to scream, but I bit down on my lip, forcing myself to stay silent. The fingers lingered, cold and unrelenting, before pulling away. The whispers stopped. I didn't open my eyes until the first rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains. The room was empty, but the walls were covered in deep, jagged claw marks. I've been on the road ever since, stopping only when I absolutely have to. But no matter where I go, they find me. Every night, at 3:33 a.m., they come back. They get closer each time. The whispers grow louder. And last night, for the first time, one of them spoke my name. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if I can escape. But if you're reading this, consider it a warning. If you ever find yourself awake at 3:33 a.m., do not open your eyes. Don't move. Don't speak. Because once they know you're awake, they'll never let you go.